on all membership-related issues. Therefore, there's no better way to kick off the post-COVID recovery period than to revert back to our basic mandate of supporting and contributing our quota to national recovery efforts. Therefore, the theme of this webinar is quite timely. It is also necessary to announce that in pursuit of our core objective, and that is to promote trade and investment between Nigeria and the United States, we have reached an agreement with the commercial section of the US Embassy for them to make a presentation on the activities of the section and its impact on Nigerian businesses to our members, which was also scheduled to be part of today's program. Incidentally, the head of the section, Jennifer Woods, was suddenly called upon to participate at a training program the whole of this week. Notwithstanding, we are continually engaging them, and we have mutually agreed to have the presentations by then, as well as you see it in September. The Secretariat will screen the list of upcoming events and schedule dates for the rest of the year during this meeting. Without wasting further time, we are privileged to have here with us our highly cerebral and indefatigable Mr. Aswe Godalo, who is currently the chairman of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, NESG, and also a board member of the chamber, to brief us on the Nigerian economic outlook for the year 2020 and beyond. We thank our guest speaker and all our members virtually connected here with us for kindly sparing the time to be with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish all of us a fruitful deliberation. Thank you for your attention. Shola?
So thank you,
That's it.
Vice President. May we now call on our guest speaker, Mr. Aswe Godalo, to proceed with his presentation, after which we'll have some Q&A, comments, and feedback. Mr. Godalo, please.
Thank you very much, Shola. Nigeria is going through very, very difficult times, economically, socially, and politically. This is a time that tries men's souls. A time for all of us to put our heads together, work closely, cooperatively, and do everything necessary to lift Nigeria up from where it is to where it should be, considering our potential and capacities, and for the sake of our children and our people. Too many lives and livelihoods are at stake. The private sector must lead the charge in uplifting Nigeria's potential for our collective sakes and in enlightened self-interest. We must continue conferring and working with government and civil society to determine and forge the best path forward. No blaming, no naming, no obsession with the past, but with our sights firmly fixed on our future. The President of the Nigerian-American Chamber of Commerce, ably represented by Mr. Vice President, council members, distinguished DG, senior government officials, captains of industry, gentlemen of the press, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I thank the Nigerian-American Chamber of Commerce for inviting me to discuss the Nigerian economy with this esteemed gathering of mainly private sector folk. My hope is that we will use our time here judiciously to table critical issues about the state of the Nigerian economy and begin a new, candid conversation about how we move forward and upward. Today, I will share highlights of the state of the global economy, emphasizing on the impact of COVID-19. I will talk about our country's economic performance to date and outlook for the future. I will then present some suggestions on how I think we can achieve economic resilience and make a strong recovery despite the current circumstances. COVID-19 pandemic and the state of the global economy. The year 2020 has been a tough year for the world. I dare say a rough year. A year such as we've neither seen nor experienced in living memory. The outbreak of COVID-19 brought global economic and social upheaval, leading to systems-wide shocks and cascading vulnerabilities that have reshaped the direction of many economies and dragged nearly all the countries of the world into recession. According to the World Health Organization, as at the 26th of August 2020, there have been 23,752,965 confirmed cases of COVID-19 globally. Of this, 815,038 died. Beyond that staggering direct death toll, the pandemic has aggravated pre-existing socioeconomic, political, and governance challenges, further threatening lives and livelihoods in the short and medium term. The IMF describes this as the worst global recession since the 1929 Great Depression, and projects that the global economy will contract by at least 4.9% at the end of year 2020, with advanced economics in the aggregate experiencing a decline by as much as 8% in the year. In particular, the United States and the European zone countries are forecasted to contract by over 12% and over 10.2% respectively. We have already seen the US economy contract by 4.8%, the European countries by 2.86%, and the UK by 2% in the first quarter of 2020. But wait for this. In the second quarter of 2020, data just released confirmed that the US economy suffered its worst economic decline on record by contracting 32.9%. The OECD countries contracted by 9.8% in Q2, with the UK dropping steeply by 20.4%. This is really a world catastrophe. The Chinese economy recorded a decline of 6.8% in the first quarter of 2020. And although China closed Q2 2020 with an 11.5% GDP growth, it too, like the rest of the world, is still fighting to ward off the impact of this pandemic. So the world economically is in serious trouble. Agricultural production thinned, manufacturing and international trade slowed considerably, demand for oil evaporated, supply chains were disrupted, financial markets became epileptic, travel and tourism stopped, and stock and mercantile exchanges tanked. Only certain parts of the technology sector seemed to thrive. The world has changed, and the way we live, interact, trade, and do business and travel appear to have changed, at least in the short to medium term. Yet, through the catastrophic outcomes, with all governments at all levels scrambling to deal with the crisis, we have seen clear evidence of a simple truism, and that is leadership matters. Countries with focused and imaginative national and business leaders, with strong institutions and resilient and creative private sectors, have coped much better than those without. It is no accident, and it is not by chance. The state of the Nigerian economy from recession to COVID-19. For the Nigerian economy, this pandemic has been a double, perhaps a triple whammy. Coming on the back of the 2016 economic recession and the oil trade scuffle between Russia and Saudi Arabia at the beginning of this year. Our already fragile Nigerian economy may have taken one beating. Our GDP growth rate since 2016 has hovered around 2%, which, side by side with a population growth rate of nearly 3% before the COVID-19 outbreak, means we have been in negative growth for the last 4 years. Economic indicators such as our external reserves, foreign direct investment flows, unemployment, and our current account balance have told the story loud and clear, all exhibiting a weak performance, attributable to challenges in the policy environment and pre-existing problems of infrastructure deficit, inadequate power supply, difficult business environment, unemployment, and reduced investments. Of great concern is the decidedly uninclusive nature of the very few positives recorded on our GDP scale. Our poor have continued to get poorer, insecurity has heightened in many parts of the country, and the quality of our life has worsened. Unemployment and underemployment combined reach a peak of over 49% at the end of the first year of 2020. We continue to have high infant and maternal mortality, and we have the highest number of out-of-school children in the world at 13.2 million. The COVID-19 pandemic and its effects gravely exacerbated our economic condition. Different institutions have projected our economic contraction in 2020 as ranging from 3.2% by the World Bank to 5.4% by the IMF. The Nigerian Economic Summit Group estimates a contraction of 4.1% in 2020. Figures released this week by the National Bureau of Statistics indicate that our economy contracted by over 8% to minus 6.1% at the end of Q2 2020. Low crude oil prices and demand drop, limited economic activity due to movement restrictions, business shutdowns and social distancing protocols, reduced tax and other non-oil income receipts, all contributed to this our contraction. With no global recovery in sight, the trend points to a full-blown recession by Q4 2020 and a further deepening of our economic crisis unless we, all of us, respond creatively and diligently. Our trade and current account balances have shrunk, primarily due to much lower crude oil earnings, staunched forex inflows, leading to a significant decline in our external reserves, which fell to $33.4 billion in April 2020 from $38.4 billion in January. The recent NBS figures indicate our reserves at $35 billion. So at the end of Q2, our reserves have been at $35 billion. Our reduced oil earnings exerted considerable pressure on the value of our currency, and our economy remains highly vulnerable to external shocks. A heavy price for our refusal to diversify our economy. We have paid lip service to this diversification strategy for almost 2 decades and not done very much about it. In terms of investment capital, we experienced a decline in foreign investment inflows from $8.5 billion in the first quarter of 2019 to $5.9 billion in the first quarter of 2020. Most of these are portfolio investments which move in and out of our economy at will with limited long-term benefits. Foreign direct investments, or what we know as patient capital, which is linked to production, growth, and employment, accounted for only 4% of total inflows in the first quarter. In 2019, total foreign direct investment inflows remained at $932 million, far below figures obtained in comparable countries. In 2020, FDI is expected to remain below the $1 billion mark, again, due to the effects of COVID-19 and our less than investment-friendly terrain. In addition to, and in part because of our revenue and capital inflow slumps, our exchange rate volatility, our rising cost of transportation, and our supply chain bottlenecks, there has been a steady increase in inflation rate in 2020. Our headline inflation rose to 12.56% in June 2020, far in excess of the CBN target band of 6 to 9%. This has been the highest increase we've recorded since March 2018. Food prices have been a significant driver of inflation. With COVID-19, food inflation has continued to rise, given the high cost of production, the effects of the land border closure, insecurity, restriction on movements, ban on travel, and closure of schools and markets. The number of food insecure Nigerians rose from 36 million in May 2020 to 44.8 million in August 2020, according to the World Food Programme. Following the fall in government revenue, fiscal deficits have risen significantly to over 5 trillion in our revised 2020 budget, suggesting that deficit to GDP ratio will exceed the 3% upper target stipulated in the Fiscal Responsibility Act. The resultant effect of lower revenue and the higher deficit is a sharp increase in public debt, which stood at 28.6 trillion as at March 2020. Total debt at the end of the year is expected to rise further to over 32 trillion, with its implications on debt servicing costs. Amid this crisis, the one positive indicator is the improvement in credit to the private sector. The CBN's new lending to deposit ratio has resulted in a 1.44 trillion increase in loans to the private sector between January and May 2020. We hope that this momentum will be sustained to support private sector growth, as it may very well be where our hope lies. But I'll come back to that. The outlook for the Nigerian economy in the second half of 2020 and beyond. As I pointed out earlier, in our best case economic scenario, we estimate that the Nigerian economy will only contract by 4.1% at the end of this year. Of the 4 quarters of the year, I believe that the second quarter will be most affected because of the near complete halting of economic activity during this quarter, which really was aimed at curbing the spread of the virus. While we expect to see an improvement in economic activity in the second half of the year as Nigeria implements its strategies to live with the pandemic, we'll be lifting restrictions in all economic sectors, including education and entertainment, and we will be focusing on injecting liquidity into the system. But none of these activities by themselves will be even nearly enough to get us back on track if we do not act collaboratively and decisively in a world where all nations are fighting for their survival. Despite the expectation of a better second half in 2020 in terms of economic growth, other economic and social indicators will trend negatively in the year. Unemployment, poverty, and income inequality are all likely to increase significantly due primarily to the impact of COVID-19 on jobs, its economic lag effects, its impact on income and economic opportunities. Our inflation rate will continue to rise as we approach the end of 2020. The harsh business environment, possible further devaluation of the naira, insecurity, the resultant high cost of imports, and the impact on all other goods and services will assert inflationary pressures. Even before COVID-19, the weak link between our economic growth and social outcomes had been an unsavory hallmark of our development. The pandemic has perhaps made this even more palpable, with labor-intensive productive sectors contributing little to overall growth. The quality of life and standard of living of most of our people has at best remained stagnant. The people have not benefited much or nor have they been carried along in the so-called dividends of democracy. This will be our undoing if deliberate efforts are not made to spur inclusive growth, channel capital towards the expansion of critical sectors like agriculture, manufacturing, construction, trade, education, and health. Sectors that create massive unemployment and improve living standards, especially the living standards of the poor. All over the world, including in our country, we're seeing what happens where populations or sections of the population are excluded from the national growth story. Hunger, illiteracy, high infant and adolescent mortality, economic injustice, and desperation are a dangerous cocktail in high population environments. Against this backdrop, we must remember that foreign investments are expected to decline significantly due to the constrained environment and global economic contractions. Even our diaspora inflows will only drop in trickles. While the unification of our exchange rates may improve investor sentiments and foreign inflows of capital in the second half of 2020, patient capital from abroad cannot be our main hope for rebuilding the economy. Unless we are willing to do the work of jumpstarting our failing economy by increasing investments in and supporting agricultural production, implementing creative incentives that provide support for struggling businesses, and improving our business environment, not much will happen. To ameliorate the impact of the pandemic and the shutdown of economic activity, government has implemented the following. Government established a 500 billion COVID-19 crisis intervention fund to upgrade federal, state healthcare facilities and finance the creation of a special public works program in the healthcare sector. Government enhanced financial support to the states for critical healthcare expenditure, providing 190 million World Bank Regional Disease Surveillance Systems facility to be accessed by the NCDC. In addition, the federal government provided 102.5 billion naira for direct interventions. Government augmented FAC allocations to states and granted moratorium on states' debts. We withdrew $150 million from the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority Stabilization Fund to support the June 2020 FAC disbursements. Government has exempted small and micro enterprises completely from corporate taxation. Corporate rates for medium-sized enterprises was reviewed downward from 30 to 20%. Essential foods, medical supplies, and other basic items critical to fighting the COVID pandemic were made VAT exempt. Government revised the benchmark oil price and production for 2020 to $30 per barrel and 1.7 million barrels produced daily. Government reduced interest on all CBN interventions from 9% to 5%, granted a one-year moratorium on CBN intervention facilities, provided $50 billion, about $139 million targeted credit facility, injected 3.6 trillion, about 2.4% of our GDP into the banking system, intervened to restructure loans in certain sectors which are gravely affected by the consequences of COVID-19, adjusted the official exchange rate downward by 15%, moving closer to unifying our rates, provided special foreign exchange funding for pharmaceutical companies. All of these efforts, laudable as they are, will not be sufficient to ameliorate the impact of COVID-19 on our economy. It is estimated that our country needs at least 10.1 trillion in palliative interventions to stave off a COVID-induced recession, and our current intervention capacity stands at only about 4.5 trillion. We therefore need to close a 5.6 trillion gap. So the question is, how do we fund that gap? Faced with the dual problem of declining revenue and the absence of adequate savings, either in the form of external reserves or fiscal buffers to finance such a huge gap, that gap must somehow be plugged. Policymakers are left with the options of borrowing domestically and or externally, incentivizing FDI, or embarking on quantitative easing. And this only just addresses the matter of getting us out of the pandemic-induced recession as urgently as possible. To then catalyze an inclusive growth necessary to move our country forward will require more thought, more action, more resources, and a greater overall commitment. To tackle the short, medium-term challenges, the federal government announced an Economic Sustainability Plan, ESP, aimed at averting a deep economic recession. Hopefully, it's expected that if implemented, this will kickstart an inclusive growth path and start the build of economic resilience. The plan outlined a combination of projects and policy approaches to improve real sector performance and ensure a sound fiscal and monetary environment going forward. Some of the measures in this plan include creating a mass housing program, supporting small and medium businesses, strengthening social safety net programs, unifying the exchange rate, and improving infrastructure delivery. However, we're not quite clear about the financing sources to enable the implementation of this plan. Only this week, Mr. President confirmed that he will commit the rest of his term to growing the economy, fighting poverty, improving education and healthcare, and enhancing productivity. We look forward to receiving his detailed plans to achieve all of this. So, how do we grow an economy that works for all of us? As a country, we have never had difficulty formulating well thought through, brilliant and detailed economic development and growth plans, visions and policies, most of which have been crafted by first-class economists and brilliant social minds. From our 1945 10-year development and welfare plan, through to our 1962 to 1968 development plan, our first after independence, to the 1985 to 1990 plan, which was our fifth after independence, to our Vision 2010, to needs, to Vision 2020, to the 7-point agenda, to the economic growth and recovery plan, we have had some of the best forward-looking plans. Again, crafted by some of the best economic and business minds in the world. We are now in the process of formulating a medium-term agenda that delivers on the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030 and a longer-term plan that assures an industrially advanced, technologically enabled, economically prosperous, radically inclusive, and peaceful Nigeria by 2050. So, the problem is not with the capacity of our minds. We do not lack imagination, nor are we deficit in the brilliance required to articulate our thoughts. The problem, I believe, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, is our inability to effectively and diligently implement our great plans. And I believe that this has been caused mainly by a lack of government, private sector, and societal alignment. Without such alignment, the will, the discipline, and the capacity to execute these best laid plans can simply not be mustered. We must have a consensus at the national level on where we need or want to go and what it will take of all of us, not just government, all of us, what it will take to get us to where we want to go or get us to where we need to go. Once our plans are determined, we must break them down to a series of sound bites, similar to Go On with One Nigeria, for those old enough to remember, during the Civil War, or our recent campaign to wear masks to save lives. So all of these campaigns got through to all of our people, from the elderly to the young, from the affluent to the poor. We must campaign to get everyone plugged into what we must do to save our economic lives and thereby ultimately save our lives. At the level of the private sector, we must see clearly that our economy needs to grow at a consistent rate of over 8% over 10 years. If our population is growing at 3%, then we must grow at over 8% over 10 years. We must see that we are the winners if we're able to create jobs for our people, educate them, build infrastructure, greatly improve our healthcare and delivery systems, become major exporters of finished goods, become a technological hub, diversify our economy and move away from a monoproductive economy, reform our public sector, and procure proactive, fair, and creative regulation. We must do the basic math of enlightened self-interest and understand that 0.1% of an actualized Nigerian economy is worth more than 10% of a stunted Nigerian economy. Until that arithmetic sinks in and our behavior aligns with that arithmetic, we cannot point fingers. We cannot lean on government without first leaning on ourselves collectively. This starts with setting aside our crabs in the bucket, scarcity-fueled approach to capitalism. Nigeria's resources, natural and human, can deliver exponentially greater wealth to all of us if we learn to think and work collaboratively. The term co-petition was coined in 1996, and it speaks to the essence of what we need to do as private sector leaders in Nigeria. I won't patronize us by delving into its meaning, except to say that only by marrying cooperation with our fierce competitive spirits can we create truly transformative growth in this country and guarantee that government finally takes us seriously as partners and joint developers, not as selfish carpetbaggers, scroungers, or sycophants. The development monopolies that have succeeded in accelerating national development in South Korea, China, in Malaysia have typically been government-backed. We have tried that here without success. And while it is possible to examine the reasons why we didn't succeed with that structure, maybe what may move us further and farther along faster is examining what we do well as a people, despite our challenges. Some of the things we do well: we innovate, we build small businesses, we execute, however imperfectly, we can focus when we must, we can be passionate, we can be extremely hard and smart workers, we understand our markets, we extract value from our markets. If only we could scale all of that up and move from extracting to building value at scale. If only we could engage first in what we apply this Nigerian acumen to achieving, and then focus on how. What am I suggesting? I am suggesting that the private sector needs effective, creative, unselfish, focused, broad-minded leadership. The private sector, probably led by this chamber, working with the NESG and all other members of the organized private sector and informal sectors, must urgently think through and implement a mechanism and process where we not only contribute to the crafting of plans and visions, but also take collective leadership in the effective, faithful, and diligent implementations of these plans, visions, and policies. It is possible through private sector ownership, collaboration, and messaging to compel a national consensus on what we really want as a country and how we can achieve it. We have done this with the COVID-19 messaging. Private sector entities, from financial institutions to large and small manufacturers, have waded in on public health messaging. So why can't we do this messaging? We worked as partners and we supported government. So why can we not achieve the same with our economic health? Is that not as central to our collective survival and prosperity? The conversations we get caught up in about the nature, quality, and role of government, our differences and our challenges, while they're important, are to my mind distracting, self-serving, and possibly futile. The issues of how we achieve the outcomes we desire, the nature of persons that can lead and drive the implementation of such a vision, and the details of who does what will be far more easily answered if we agree on where we want to go. To put it in private sector language, strategy should define organizational structure and not the other way around. Until the private sector, working as one together, engage in and lead this planning and national consensus process in a focused and unselfish way, and in that process win government's trust, it is extremely unlikely that we will achieve a different or better success levels and outcomes with the plans we now plan to conceive. We can sit here and name all our problems. We can complain about our state of economic and social unpreparedness, our poor infrastructure, our massive unemployment, our high literacy levels, our regulatory high-handedness, our massive insecurity, our disregard for the rule of law, our prolonged and inefficient dispute resolution mechanisms, our hobbled health infrastructure, our slow technology uptake, our difficult business and trade terrain, our direct and disguised corruption and its attendant misallocation of resources. We can complain about all of these things which have been made worse by COVID-19 pandemic and its debilitating consequences. But complaining and naming problems does not fix these problems. The need now is for us to place our finger on the reset button and start again. Like I said, the corporate response to curbing COVID, our response to fighting Ebola, and the forged unity in rehabilitating, reforming, and restructuring Nigeria after a civil war provides some template for the power of collective intervention, both in collaboration with, by, and independent of government. Other tested approaches as we advance to the execution of plans include the evolution of development clusters and organized lobbying. We have options, ladies and gentlemen, if we're willing to think and act for a smaller slice of a much bigger cake. It sounds counterintuitive, but that is the arithmetic of scale, without which we are all diminished. Our big slogan must be that big economies matter. That is my message to you. They matter far more than big businesses or so-called big business people in maimed economies or tiny stunted nations. We must be in a hurry, and we must recognize that it makes more sense for all of us to move together on a high-speed jet than it does for one of us or only our own businesses to ride on a donkey. We must stop the donkey logic. That must be our first shift. One of the biggest challenges we have had in government engagement has been the lack of private sector consensus. Greed, short-sighted self-interest, and private sector corruption has had the effect of calcifying government's distrust of our advice, support, and suggestions, and undermining our potential influence on real systemic change. So, as our second step, the private sector must learn to act trustworthy in order to win the trust and respect of our peers and our government. We must learn to speak as one and overcome the expediency of saying some things during the day while doing different things at night. The key here is critical mass. We must admit to ourselves that there will be some who have been committed to and benefited from donkey logic for so long and so much, but that the project and prospect of riding on an imaginary high-speed jet simply seems foolish. But we must build it regardless, because we know that donkeys cannot carry the weight of an unleashed Nigeria. Our next development agenda must be shaped by us, by the aspirations of the people of Nigeria, and by our intelligent greed for less of more. Big economies matter, and those of us here on this webinar can lead the charge in building it. We know how to think and execute in isolation. Now, we must harness and catapult that capacity into a groundswell for implementing the right plans that enable inclusive growth and development. I strongly believe that if we can diligently organize and lead that process, the quality of our political leadership will ultimately yield to the dictates of our aspirations. We will finally get the leadership we need. Only a foolish man, they tell us, keeps doing the same thing the same way, expecting to get different results. The option to blame government for not building the road to progress so that we can all ride donkeys can be taken off the table. We can choose to build and ride into our future on a jet of progress that only experienced and qualified pilots can fly. It's either we stay with our donkey thinking and perish, or embrace the principle that big economies matter. It is time to start to see this as our choice and our call. In closing, I implore this chamber and its members, working with others of like mind, to please make the right call and lead the charge to change this nation. I thank you all for listening. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Ighodalo. That was very enlightening and invigorating, delivered as expected. We thank you very much, and with your permission, it will be a privilege for us to share the contents of your presentation with the members on the forum, if you agree, sir.
That's fine. That was the intention, sir. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much. So, members connected with us, you get this presentation from Mr. Ighodalo. Do we have any feedback, questions, comments?
It seems as if the Vice President wants to ask a question.
Mr. Vice President.
Let me start by saying a big thank you to our guest speaker. I mean, this was like an MBA class for me. And I've enjoyed every minute, every line of this presentation.
Thank you, sir.
And I can't wait to grab a copy of the presentation so that we can synthesize it further and circulate, by way of content to reach a wider audience through some of our news platforms. I still want to say, Mr. President, Otumba Oluwatoyin Akomolafe is here with us in spirit, unavoidably absent, because he really look forward to this day. In fact, he reminded me that he must not miss it, when we discussed some time back. So I want to assure you, our guest speaker, that there was just a clash of engagement. And that the problem with big men, sir, scheduling challenges.
I know he's a really big man and he's my boss, so I understand the pressures on his time.
He conveys his good wishes, and I want to assure you that he will get proper feedback and report from this webinar. Now, I listened carefully, and I particularly enjoyed that what you talked, your thesis about stopping the donkey logic or donkey thinking, largely because the organized private sector, there's no collaboration, there's no unity, there is selfishness, there's lack of, cooperation, as it were. So, and I think that is a fundamental problem. This me, myself, and I thinking. It's a big problem in this environment. Maybe it is cultural. We don't collaborate. The world is coming together, forging alliances, partnerships. But here, we like our own little spaces. I think I would rather take 5% of a $1 billion enterprise than saying I must have 100% of $1 million. So if we can shift, if our thinking can shift, because you said we should shift from our donkey thinking and getting on the ride in a fast-moving jet. I think that's a fundamental issue, and it looks like a cultural challenge for us as individuals and business people. And that has its own impact on the kind of political leadership that we have in this country, and they are not mutually exclusive. So I don't know how we can really solve that problem, because the challenges in the economy, from what your presentation, they are quite, they are serious, and it's going to have a spillover into next year, because we must understand that businesses are dying. A lot of people have become unemployed or jobless or even unemployable. So if we situate all of this, in the same context of your presentation, sir, how can we develop this shift from donkey thinking? I think it's something we really need to explore further. I'm interested in the concept, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. Should I respond to this, or will you take a few other questions?
Or maybe we'll take more. Maybe we'll take more.
Maybe whilst we're waiting for more questions, let me try and respond to the Vice President.
Hello, Mr. Guest Speaker.
Yes, sir.
Our past President, Chief Famutimi, and Mr. Bayo do also have questions. Do you want to take this first, or do we take everything together?
Yes, we can. We can take the three, and then I'll try and respond to the three.
Okay, so Chief Famutimi and Mr. Ido.
Are they muted? Let them speak.
I think
they should unmute themselves.
Okay. Hello, this is Bayo.
Hello.
Bayo Ido on the line. Can I continue?
Yes.
Please proceed, sir.
That is Bayo Ido to proceed.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much for the opportunity to make a few observations. I'd like to thank the presenter by first asking him, we could not see his face. I think the light was hitting his back rather than his face. So in future, we would like you to adjust your position so that the light can hit your face and we can see you.
Apologies.
It was a very blunt presentation, but even I would have loved you to be even more blunt in the area of in the political and social environment. If we need to be united, which we must, then the political environment is not right. The security environment is not, people, I want to see us getting out of this quagmire by concentrating on agriculture, which you rightly identified. But how can people do agriculture when the interior is not secure? The interior, if you tell your friend that you want to travel by road nowadays, they will just tell you are crazy. That is a point. Then
Sorry, Mr. Ido, I've lost you. I can't, Mr. Ido, you've muted yourself.
I'm sure he's still speaking.
Yeah, you've muted yourself, Mr. Ido.
Please unmute yourself, sir.
I have done that.
Okay.
Okay.
So after you talked about the inability to go into agriculture because of insecurity, I lost you, sir.
Oh, okay.
You were talking about our political and social environment, our insecurity, that we need to go into agriculture, yes, but we can't because of our insecurities. That's where we lost you, sir.
Okay. What I'm saying is the farmer, the average farmer cannot go to the farm to farm securely. That is a huge challenge. And I think we need to drum it up to government to work on this area. The insecurity is not just in one part of the country, it's in every part. And then, even in our political discourse, granted the politicians cannot be in one party, but we need to be able to come together on this note and ensure that we fashion a way forward to influence our economics. That's what I'm trying to say. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, sir. A great contribution. But and I think it goes, your contribution, Chief Ido, goes to the heart of the direction of my paper, but we'll come to it when I respond.
Can I speak now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Aswe.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, sir. Long time, sir.
Thank you very much. That was an extremely brilliant paper.
Yes, sir.
Doesn't surprise me. You are famous as a lawyer, but you're more of a management group and an economist.
Thank you, sir.
Just proving that. There are so many things that one would want to comment on the issue of our economy. Touched quite a number of them. What Mr. Ido has just talked is just one of them also. I mean, the question of insecurity. But there are so many other things. Sir, the situation where we are in horrible debt situation, that we are spending over 60% of our income to manage to pay debts. There is nothing left, and we are not doing anything. The fact that ours is a mono-product economy, and since the crash of oil prices, and since we were never exporting anything, it's gotten worse. We are not making money, but the government is committing huge sums into projects that we have no means of funding or financing. So the government seems so confident that it is able to make all these expenses. What is it doing? It is doing deficit financing. Where does it expect to get this money from? From more borrowing, from more taxations, and other things. And what one wonders, what gives the people who are running our economy the confidence that they can go on in this very, very wild expending. I mean, we're spending money as drunken sailors, as it is, as if the money is so assured it is there. Of course, we are mortgaging the future of the children unborn in this country, who we are contracting this debt on behalf of for them to come and pay them. Meanwhile, we are not making provisions for the future about how these are children, these are born children, will be able to generate money to pay, to fill the hole we are digging for them. Because all we are doing is that we are consuming what we do not produce. We are not investing in any form which will be able to cover this in the future. And with what we are seeing, whereby the government of today only thinks about itself, about the personnel, we're still running the most expensive type of government anybody can find. I mean, our cost of government is more expensive than anywhere, I mean, that I've seen in the whole world. And I've not seen that, and nobody seems to be bothering about that. Where you are still seeing governors appointing numberless helpers, political appointees, and all sorts. And they think it's a job for the boys. So with no money coming in, they are still engaging more and more and more and more as it is. So I don't know where we are going now. You have a situation where another source of potential source of income, that's minerals. Instead of organizing it and letting it work, we have a situation where the whole thing is totally disorganized. Chinese have invaded wherever they say there's anything that looks like minerals, and have employed internet miners, and the whole thing is not arranged, is not properly managed. You are having a situation where the Niger Delta is a total mess. We read the NDDC reports recently, and the case of the minister being interviewed, and when he wanted to start revealing names of even his interviewers to expose their involvement, what we are saying, and the minister, it's all right, it's just to keep him short, so he wouldn't reveal them. We are listening to what is happening at the House of Reps, where they are closing down the House of Reps so that they will not be in session, so that the investigations can be stopped, deliberately done. These are all fraudulent. I mean, I don't see what you see in this country, any other part of the world. So, it turned us to the joke of the whole world. Are we serious? And we are expecting these people to take us seriously, continue to lend us money, to give us support and donations and all sorts. So actually, I don't know. I mean, the issues are so many and so multifaceted. I don't know where we are going, but I know where we are coming from. We are coming from a mess and heading for more mess as it is. I pity Go Country. I mean, I can go on talking, but these are my points right now.
Thank you very much, sir. You know, all the three questions are different shades of the same thing. So I'll try and respond to the three questions together. So I thank the Vice President I thank Chief Ido and I thank my Egbon. If we take a step back and look at the thesis of what I am trying to say, what I'm trying to say is simply this. You know, we can point our fingers at government. We can point fingers at the past. We can point fingers at the political structure, like my Egbon has said, that we have, which is the most expensive, which sometimes appears to be selfish. We can look at the state of our insecurity. We can look at where we are as a country. But you know, pointing all these fingers isn't going to solve any problem from where we sit today. And what I want us to truly focus on is how can we genuinely, as the Nigerian private sector, solve this problem? That's what I want us all to think about. How can we, as the Nigerian private sector, solve this problem? How can we do a soul search, an inward soul search, and look at ourselves as the private sector and consider, have we done all the things we need to do, and have we done them very well? Have we looked at other economies and seen the influence and contribution of the private sector to the development of those economies and the influence of the private sector on governance? In most developed economies, the private sector decides the direction of governance. So that's why I want us to take a step back and look at ourselves very, very critically. The private sector in Nigeria must purge itself and must come together as one, speaking with one voice and determining the direction that he wants the Nigerian economy to go. If the Nigerian private sector speaks with one voice and it's focused and it's unselfish, then it will have a lot more influence with government, and it will have a lot more influence in the political parties, and it will have a lot more influence in determining the people to rule and govern us in this country. Now, if we don't take this seriously, we're not going to take anything seriously. If we don't take a step back and think about this and look at how we're going to start dealing with the issue, then we're not going to go very far. That is why I'm calling on this chamber, other organized private sector, all private sector and social society and civil society to look at how do we move forward in implementing all of these many plans we've crafted. And we can't do it except we work and collaborate with government and get government to implement those things that work for Nigeria. It's a catch-22 situation. But if the private sector doesn't stand up as one, then government will not take us seriously. Government will do what it thinks is in our own interest, whether rightly or wrongly. And then we go around in this circle that we've been going on for 60 years. And it hasn't taken us very far. So specifically, sir, Vice President Chief Ido and my Egbon, I think we need to take a step back. We shouldn't point fingers to anybody. Let us all together as the private sector decide what we think is in Nigeria's best interest. Let us pass that information to our people. Let us speak with one voice and tackle government and make government understand why government should work with us and listen to us. If we do that, we will see a change. If we do that, government will take us more seriously. Government will know that it has to participate with us. Government will know that it cannot take us for granted. And we will then have a lot more influence on who. I don't want us to have a situation, for instance, of getting to 2022. The political parties decide on one Tweedledee and one Tweedledum, and then they tell the private sector, come and fund us. You know, that's what has been happening in the past. The private sector must determine who those people are. We're not politicians, and we're not going to join political parties. But we must ensure that each party or any political party brings forward its best mind. It's not the mind that the political parties think we want or that they want for their own interest. It's what we think is in Nigeria's best interest. So we should start that active collaboration as the private sector. Until we do that, we're not going to go very far. Chief Ido, it's a catch-22 situation. We must make a first move from a first point. And I am asking the private sector to be the catalyst of that first move. The private sector must examine itself, must think inwardly, and must collaborate. There's too much donkey mentality. There's too much everybody thinking of his personal or his business self-interest. Even in sectors, we don't collaborate, not to talk of as the whole of the private sector. In different sectors, you find different players doing different things that are inimical to the interest of the collaborative interest. No, that must stop. If that doesn't stop, government won't take us seriously. If person A in the morning goes to say something to government and person B in the evening goes to say something else, at the end of the day, government will take the line of least resistance. And that line may not be the best line for us. So the private sector needs to stand up and determine what's in our collective best interest and then start driving that process. That's my message. And I stick with that message. And I think, honestly, from where Nigeria is today, I think the private sector is the one driver I see that can change the cultural thinking and the economic development of Nigeria. I'm clear about that. I've looked at it. You know, the politicians will not purge themselves. You cannot ask a turkey to vote for Christmas. The politicians have enjoyed the structure as it is, and they will continue enjoying it as it is for as long as we have any semblance of an economy. So it's us, the private sector, that need to step up. And if we don't step up, then we're going to be in real trouble. Thank you. Yes, DG, are there any more questions?
I don't know whether I've been allowed to just add just this small additional contribution, guest speaker. Just 3 areas of concern for me.
Yes, sir.
The context of a sluggish economy, a growing population. 3 issues. Number 1, the debt burden. We have been borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. I don't know how we're going to pay back. Maybe it's our great grandchildren that will pay back. I don't know how and when. That is number 1, sir. 2, the population explosion. It is projected that by 2050, Nigeria will be 400 million people, the 3rd most populous nation in the world after India and China. There will be impact on unemployment, infrastructure, which is not anywhere good now. So what should we be doing between now and 2050, 30 years from now? I say this because we keep on mentioning Singapore, we mention Norway, Dubai, and of late, Rwanda. What is it that they are doing right that we are not doing in this country? Is it because the organized private sector in those places work together, they stand up together and influence public opinion and shape, what is going on in the economic circles, in the political circles in this country? So I worry about the population explosion. And then finally, sir, the Naira used to be 75 kobo to the dollar some many years ago. Today, as I speak to you, sir, even though the central bank is trying to harmonize the rates, I recall before COVID-19 pandemic hit the world, it was relatively stable. I mean, it was CBN rate there, I think it was 306, then the rest of us were buying at 360. Today, I think it is officially now 386 or 388. But in the black market yesterday, it was 476. From 75 kobo to the dollar is now 476 naira to the dollar. I am concerned, sir. I am seriously worried. The politicians are not helping the situation, which is the concern expressed by Chief Famutimi, our past president, and Ambassador Bayoidu. If the solution is for the private sector to come together and take the initiative, how are we going to solve this, what I call multidimensional problems, with even inflation on the increase over 13% now? Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. And thank you. I'm grateful for your specific questions. I agree with you that the debt burden is very troublesome and very worrying, extremely so. My greater concern is not the debt we are taking by itself. My greater concern is exactly what are we using that debt for. Now, if you are using debt in productive sectors, in sectors that over time will enable us repay the debts and will improve the capacity of our economy, then it's not that terrible. We'll suffer a bit today to be able to repay tomorrow and to grow our economy. But if we are taking debt and we're utilizing the debt in the consumption aspects of our economy, then we're in serious trouble. I'm not quite clear that all of the debt we are taking is going into the productive sector of our economy. So that worries me as much as it worries you. And so what we need to start doing is asking the government the right question as regards the debts we are taking. What are we using this debt for? Are we channeling this debt for the productive sectors of our economy? Is this debt genuinely going to infrastructure development, the kind of infrastructure that will help our economy grow? And that's the challenge we all have. And as the organized private sector, these are the questions we need to be asking. And this is the pressure we need to be placing both on the executive and on the legislature. I think part of the problem is that many of us, because of our unenlightened personal interests, don't speak up enough and don't speak up at all. We speak up in our sitting rooms, we speak up in our bedrooms, but we fail to speak truth to power. And because we are not organized as one, it's easy for divide and rule to be utilized against us. So that's why I go back to the question that we must come together as one and look at what is truly in the enlightened interest of the economy of Nigeria. If we're able to do that, then we can speak truth to power. It's not that Chief Fatima says something this morning and Ambassador Idowu says something different at night. You know, like I said in my speech, government will look for the line of least resistance. But if we all come and speak together with one voice, it's more difficult. So I agree with you, sir. I'm worried about the debt burden. But what we can do about it is put a lot more pressure on our legislature and on our executive. This money we're borrowing, what are we using it for? If we don't use it for the right things, then we're mortgaging the future of our country. If we use it for the right things, then we're catalyzing the development of our country. So that's the way I see the issue of debt burden. And I think those are the questions we need to ask. And we're not asking these questions. So it's not for you to be asking me these questions and I will be offering a response. It's for us as a collective body to be asking those who are taking the debt these questions and to be querying them and to be observing them and to be watching what we're using the money for. That's fundamental. A few years ago, the government of Chief Olusegun Obasanjo got us out of a major aspect of our debt. In the last few years, we have been ramping up on debt again. So can we match the money we've borrowed with the investments we have on the ground? If we're not able to match, can we then be asking the right questions? So that for me is the issue. We need to be able to force government by asking the right questions in the right places to match debt, expenditure with outcome. And in my paper, I said so. I said our social outcomes and our economic outcomes do not reflect many things. And so we have to start asking the right questions as a people. When we have people that are enlightened and without personal self-interest, focus on looking for the collective good, then government takes them a lot more seriously. That's as regards the debt burden. Population explosion, I can't agree with you more. In the next 30 years, we'll be the third biggest country in the world. And we're going to be in serious trouble if we continue the way we are continuing. We'll not be able to feed ourselves, we'll not be able to clothe ourselves, and we'll not have any jobs for ourselves. So it's clear to us that how are we going to fend for a 400 or 500 million naira, 500 million people population in the next 20 to 30 years? Where are we going to find the jobs from? Where will we find the infrastructure? Today, our infrastructure cannot cope with our population today. So imagine if we continue the way we are continuing, what will happen to our infrastructure? So where are we going to find jobs? What will happen to our people? Are they going to continue swimming across the Mediterranean? That won't work. People won't let that happen. So what are we going to do? So we have to look inwards. We have to definitely create a lot more jobs. How do we create jobs? We create jobs by investment. How do we encourage investment? How do we ask you to bring your money to set up industry in Nigeria when you can set up industry somewhere else? You can even go down the road to Ghana and set up industry. Capital is fungible. It goes to where it's welcome. So what do we need to do? How do we encourage policies in this country that attracts investments and capital to build the kind of industry that will create jobs? What are we doing about our agriculture? What are we doing about small and medium scale businesses? What are we doing about them? So, it's not rocket science. The things we need to do as a country are clear. If we look at countries that have developed, people have used different models, and that comes to the issue of the question when you were talking about what do we need to do right and our economic structures. People use different models. If you look at, and I mentioned it in my paper, the South Korean and Chinese model, those were predominantly government-led models, but the governments led in a direction that achieved success. There are other models that have been collaboration of government and private sector, and those models have also worked. What I have said is that so far we have tried the government-led model and it hasn't seemed to have worked well. So can we now try the private sector government model and try and make it work well? That's the point I'm making. And so as regards population explosion, we need to start getting ready for jobs for this population. As it is now, we have about nearly 50% unemployment and underemployment. And that's why we have a lot of this insecurity that we have all over the country. We have youths, able-bodied men and women who have no work, who have no investment in this environment. If people have no investment in the environment, have no work, and are barely literate, then the devil has found work for idle hands. It's as simple as that. It's common sense, it's not rocket science. So what do? We need to improve our social infrastructure. We need to improve schools. We need to find jobs. All over the country, you can touch the places where there are investments in jobs, so we need to do better than that. And we need to focus on this, and we need to start getting ready. We're in the process of new development plans, short, medium-term plan, long-term plan. Now, the issue for me, and which is what I also said in the paper, is not the issue of planning, it's the issue of the implementation of those plans. If those plans are properly implemented, then we'll be ready for 2050. We will be able to feed our population, and we'll be able to find jobs for our population, and we'll grow a great economy. But the problem we've had since 1945 through to 1962 through to today is that all of these brilliantly written documents that have piled up in the Ministry of Planning, if you go to the Ministry of Planning, you will find them there. What have we done with them? That's the problem. And how can we force that we can do something with them? That's my question. And my answer to that question is that we have tried government-led. It doesn't appear to have worked. Can we try something else so that we don't behave like the foolish man that keeps trying the same thing and wants a different answer? So that's my answer to that. The private sector needs to now work its way, speaking as one. And we need to examine this option and examine it very seriously. We'll finish this webinar, we'll finish our next meeting and our next meeting, and we'll all go to our different homes and our different businesses and not think collectively. I think it's high time we started thinking collectively, and we dragged in people of like minds into this process. And if we think collectively and speak with one voice, government will listen. Government is from us, and government will listen. But we finish all of this, I take all of these brilliant questions, and we all forget about it, and we go about what we do normally. I think we need to take a step back and start looking at how we're going to do an economic resurgence. And it has to start from the private sector, since government-led hasn't worked to date. On the issue of the devaluation of the Naira, that's very simple. Once we got oil, we stopped producing. Everybody focused on oil. So we started importing everything importable, toothpicks, every silly thing. And people started, and we became a rentier economy, commission agent economy, arbitrage economy. We killed our agriculture. We used to be number 2 in cocoa in the world, number 1 in palm produce. We used to be serious in groundnuts. We even started the basis of manufacturing, substitution manufacturing. All of the estates that were built in Ikeja and all along the corridors where we have industrial estates today were conceptualized in the early 60s, when we had our first and second national development plans. So what have we done since then? We found oil and everybody went to sleep. Everybody became lazy. Everybody became an arbitrager. That's the problem. And it's simple economics. If you import more than you export, then you have a major problem. And that's the problem of our currency. The foreign exchange flow comes from one direction primarily, and that's from our oil. Some now from diaspora inflows, some from foreign direct investment. But the totality of that foreign exchange inflow is not enough for the outflow that we see. So what do? We need to reduce that outflow. How do we reduce that outflow? We need to start producing here, and we need to start exporting more. So we need to increase inflow, and we need to reduce outflow. That's the only way we can strengthen our currency. And it's simple, it's not difficult. But what we have done over the years is that we have lacked the discipline to do this. So some of us will remember when 1 naira was $1 and be talking about yesteryears. The yesteryears have gone. So what are we going to do about the future? How do we now, when the president was campaigning, he said he will make 1 naira $1. And I said, okay, how is that going to be done? The discipline to do that. And it's going to take a long time. And it's going to take serious discipline and serious hard work. And our currency will continue going down until we as the private sector, working jointly with government, bring that discipline on the table. What happened to all the textile mills that we used to have in this country? What happened to all the other businesses? If you go up north, the whole of the Kano Industrial Estate is dead. Kaduna Industrial Estate is dead. Jos is dead, but it will be dead because of the insecurities we have. Well, why do we have insecurities? Because our youths don't have jobs. How will they have jobs? So it's a catch-22. There are no jobs, so we have idle hands. The idle hands are fertile ground for all of the insecurity, so we have a problem. So people who are neighbors living peacefully together suddenly realize that, you're not an indigenous, you're not indigenous to this environment. So that's another clash. Different things. If people are invested in this society, and if people have investments in this environment, it's very difficult for them to burn, loot, and maim. So we have to go back to the drawing board. So, sir, if we want a strong currency, all of these suggestions I am making about what we are going to do about our economy, we have to implement them. Our currency is not going to be strong by mistake. It's not going to be strong by magic. We cannot continue relying only on oil as a source of foreign currency inflow and expect that we have a strong currency. It won't happen. We need to go back even to agriculture, and to not just agricultural products. We need to then start manufacturing, and we need to start exporting properly manufactured goods. That's where a lot of countries in the world have developed. Investing in manufacturing, looking for areas of comparative advantage, and ensuring that take advantage of that or those areas. That's what we need to do. I keep saying to people that it's not rocket science. The issue we have is the will, the discipline, the commitment, and the selflessness to do the things we need to do. So I'm challenging the private sector that the private sector please start. Somebody must start. If we think government is slow in starting, then let the private sector trigger it. That's my message to this chamber today. And that I'm asking this chamber to start the process. Ask other organized private sector to come and collaborate with you so that we can speak with one voice and tell government what we want for our country. If we all keep acting in silos, in our little cocoons, nothing is going to happen. And in 2 years' time, 5 years' time, 10 years' time, in the worst circumstances, we'll be saying exactly what we're saying today. So for me, I will go back to the theme of my paper. Can the private sector please get together and start working as one? Thank you.
Our guest speaker, and want to say a big thank you for your presentation. DG, over to you. I think we should wrap up now with a vote of thanks.
Yes. Thank you very much, Mr. VP. Although at some point during the presentation, the DP and Mr. Uche Ugo Chukwu wanted to speak, but I think they've gone off now. But the day is fast spent, so I agree that we should just go straight to the vote of thanks. Miss Grace Adeyemo is on standby to do that. Lekon, can you screen Miss Adeyemo, please? Okay. So, VP, do I do the vote of thanks?
Please go ahead.
Okay. All right. So, on behalf of the president of the chamber, and membership of the chamber in general, We thank you most profusely, Mr. Ighodalo, for this eye-opening session. It's a concern for all of us as Nigerians, individually, severally, and collectively, to see that this country grows in a path that we all want, in a progressive manner, such that our children and our grandchildren can all benefit from the huge potentials of this country, which are quite obvious, but we have refused to take advantage of what we have. So we will be glad to involve you in further programs as we move forward, Mr. Ighodalo. And during the meeting also, the Secretariat has screened further programs till the end of the year. For next month, September, we have a presentation on USAID activities within the West African Trade and Investment Hub. In October 15, we have another one on the agri-chain, the potentials and contributions towards the national economic diversification policy. And the last one for the year, health management systems, healthcare systems, the role of financiers, HMOs, healthcare personnel, HR managers, and so on. So those are our line of programs between now and the end of the year. The U.S. economic session is also showing interest, but we are not sure whether they want to merge with USAID in September. If there is any change to this lineup, we'll let our members know. So that's our bouquet for the year and our menu for the year. We thank Mr. Ighodalo for answering us with a short notice, despite his very busy schedule. I thank the Vice President for standing in for the President, Mr. Ibrahima. We thank you so much. We thank all our members who have devoted this 1 or 2 hours to be part of this session. We thank you, and we'll keep you informed every step of the way on the path the Chamber shows it will tread in the next few months and in the next 1 or 2 years. Thank you all for coming, and God bless you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
The last one.
Thank you, our guest speaker again.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
I will
see you
at
the next council meeting.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So please look out for my message. Thank you. Bye-bye.
I will, sir. I will. DG, thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for coming.